I'm so excited to have you here, Jan. And we even have Jan in our office, but we are in two spots so that we have better speaker systems. We have a podcast set up, but not a webinar set up. So, all right, as everybody's coming in, I'm going to just cover a couple of admin items and then we'll get going with Jan. So, very excited that everybody's here joining us for the CFO mindset discussion. And especially after a long weekend, we know how tough calendars can be and how busy everybody is this season. So, thank you for taking the time to join us at AHA with Amplify. It's going to be a great session and we promise it'll be worth that extra effort that you're putting in to attend with us. Before we get rolling on that, here's a couple things coming up. So we have our live session, first of the season, coming up in October, and we're really, really excited about it. We have some amazing experts talking about transactions, valuation, and financing. So we have 6 of our favorite business affiliates here joining us. We're going to have an interactive session that reminds me of speed dating, and we're going to go around and hear from each of those 6 experts, along with Amplify CFOs, about transactions, valuations, and financing. So really important topics for business owners and finance leaders. So please make sure that you get a spot. We've only shared it with the AHA members and a couple times with our newsletter subscribers. So we basically are sold out, but I think we could have another handful register because we know that end of October, sadly, snow might fall or someone might have to drop out at the last minute. So we're basically at those wait list spots. And so if you want one of those spots, you do need to register right away. Nikki just shared the link. Be sure to do that either while you're listening to Jan or right after. So get a spot. October 23rd, 6 amazing experts, an interactive session. This is not an opportunity to be spoon-fed. So you need to come with your questions, your stories, and you'll learn so much and get to network and have a few bites and drinks as well. So October 23rd, live AHA with Amplify. They don't happen that often, and when they do, they're always a great time. We also have our webinars continuing. So we're really excited about our next webinar with Michael. We're going to talk about marketing and revenue and how to forecast revenue through great marketing. So very excited for our November session with Michael. And that's going to be awesome. You can register for that. He focuses on tech companies and scale-up companies and startups, but the information that he's going to share is going to be applicable for any business owner and any finance leader who wants to understand how marketing can help generate and forecast revenue, as well as many other topics that are so critical to business. So Michael's a great speaker, a great teacher, and we're very humbled that he's agreed to attend with us. So thank you, Michael, for your participation in November. So be sure to register for that. December, we're going to take off because we know you're going to be at, maybe some of you will be lucky enough to be at Jan's Christmas lunch. Others will be at a bank's Christmas lunch, but you'll be too busy to learn with us. So December, we take off and we'll be back in January, and we're so excited about the new year. We are also thrilled that we got so much feedback on our survey that we did. So we're going to incorporate that for the last months of this season, and we're going to announce a winner on our next email as well. So thank you everybody for being members of AHA with Amplify and learning with us and growing with us. Today is a very great day because we've got Jan here talking about the CFO mindset. I've seen Jan speak many times, whether it be in a live AHA with Amplify event or FEI International or FEI here locally, as well as had the privilege to be on her invite list and get to attend many of her events. And I think that what she brings to the table from a coaching perspective and from a CFO mindset perspective is very enlightening and very practical, but also big picture and strategic. So I was happy that she agreed to spend an hour with us because there's so much to learn here. So for those business owners that are on the call, what you should expect, what you need from a CFO, Jan's going to outline it. And she's got tons of clients that have gotten this from their CFO and amplified their business, not to be cheesy, because they had that CFO in that seat. And for those of you that are finance leaders, either in the CFO seat or aspiring to be a CFO, listen extra careful, get your pen out, take some notes, because these are the things that if you're forgetting to do or you don't realize you should do, you need to start. And it's very, very important in today's world that we're looking at things from the big picture, from the strategic perspective, and Jan's going to summarize that for us today. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll let you chat because that's why people attend.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I really appreciate being here and being with you as always. So I've got this presentation that I'm put together, and I'm going to take everyone on a journey of basically how I ended up being this person who isn't a CFO, obviously, who is now developing CFOs for the 21st century. So without further ado, I'm going to have this posted, my presentation. So I call it a think differently, develop a 21st century CFO mindset, because we all have to think differently. The ways of thinking before, it's not that they were wrong. It's just the world is in a different state. We're being challenged with so much more than we can even imagine. And just through my career, I've seen so much complexity and disruption. And I thought, well, where is the source of the stability in all of this that we can focus on? And of course, to me, it's the money. When you're when you think of things that are going to be coming at you that you're not even aware of, it's all going to cost money. So that's one of the reasons why I leaned into looking at the CFO world. So how did I get here? Before I go into that story, I just want to give you a story of how I became a Think Differently expert, because I branded myself that when I started to look at all the things that I'd accomplished, all the people I worked with. And so when I was very young, I was, doing fashion in Toronto. And I happened to come to this very elite health spa. And I walk in and getting organized for this fashion show. And I see a sign on the wall saying, looking for a lifeguard. And right away, in my generous way, I phone my brother and I say to him, Jack, you've got to get down here as soon as possible. They're looking for a lifeguard. And he needed a job. He was going through university. And then there's this big pause at the end of the phone call. And he says, but I can't swim. And I said, well, don't worry about that. I said, the pool's only 5 feet 9, 5 feet 9 inches, and it's 5 feet and you're 5 foot 9 inches. And so anyway, he came down and he got the job. And while he was working, he learned to swim. So that is kind of an example of how my mind thinks. I'm always looking at different ways to see things from a different view, because most of us are siloed in a way that we do our work day to day, especially in the accounting world. And so I'm always looking at it. I'm looking around it instead of straight at it. Also, when I look back and I saw the different challenges my clients had. So what I found is CEOs that I worked with were not financially savvy. And when a CFO showed up and they said they were a CFO, there was no way to actually, deep down figure out whether they were or not. Like, how do we analyze a person when they walk in and they say they're a CFO? So what happened was, because these people maybe knew the naivety of these various people, got hired. And what I saw was the damage that they did. Because of their lack of understanding, their lack of experience. And so the CEO was left with a bit of a disaster and to clean up after the fact, and wasn't equipped to do that. And the interesting thing is that they kept this inadequate person on because they didn't have the confidence in knowing how to hire again. So they kept waiting for this person to, come up to speed, figure things out, maybe take some courses on the side or whatever. But in that whole experience, I realized what they really wanted was they wanted somebody that was strategic. They wanted somebody to look at their situation and give them some strategies, financial strategies that would help them grow, help them move forward, and where they didn't have to do the heavy lifting with all the thinking. So of course that didn't exist. These people were fired eventually, of course. But I really found that there was a weakness, between the CEO and the CFO. Why is there this weakness where we assume there's an alignment? So I made it, part of my mission, to really explore and really discover what was it, and what value could I add? So when I started doing my research, the McKinsey report basically got me started. It kind of validated what I already knew when I read it, and I said, yeah, especially when I found out that the top earning CFOs in Canada weren't accountants, they were strategists. And what I also have found is that you can't teach somebody to be strategic. You can take all the courses in the world, but it comes from within. There's an instinct that I find some people have, that they just know immediately the problem. They see the problem, they know how to solve it. It just comes naturally. Maybe it borders on common sense, but it when you think about it, we think everyone's strategic, and I can guarantee you they're not. They're definitely valuable, but if you need a strategic thinker, we need to really look at who we're hiring, if that's what we need them for, and what's the evidence that they are strategic. So I also found that there is a demand, and the demand for forward thinking, full-time, contract, interim, fractional CFOs. And the demand is because of this weakness, this weak link in finance. If we don't have the strength or the foundation built, where, first of all, people within an organization understand how they make money, and how to respect the money. We're all in peril, because the money right now, the world is crazy with especially with startups and small businesses trying to raise capital. Everyone's stuck in a funnel. They're all trying to get the money from the same sources, but they're not being very creative or strategic. And that's where we need that CFO strategic mindset. So why do we have a demand? Complexity is huge. You're probably already experiencing it. You're probably looking to hire people right now that can solve problems, that are, have the experience to, see ahead, to actually, not be blindsided, to be more proactive than reactive. So when you look at this slide and you see all the things that are coming at us as a group, as business leaders, we're only as good as we are today, because it's very fragile outside of ourselves. So most of us think down. We're always looking down at what we're doing. And I encourage you to look up. We have to look up and out, because if we're not looking up and out, we're going to be blindsided for sure. We have to really either have somebody in the company that's assigned to know what's happening outside of ourselves, with our competition, with industry changes, regulatory changes, the risks that we face, because we can't take anything for granted. And this is what I've experienced with working with a lot of people in career transition right now, is, they've had this amazing career, and now they want to change, but where do they go? How do they reinvent themselves? So the complexity remedy I came up with is, the number one thing is, how do you think? We have, people say, well, gee, how do I think? It's not as simple as it sounds, because we all think. Of course, we're thinking as you're watching the screen. But it's really about, looking at all the accomplishments that you've had. And when you think about where you started and where you ended up, what is it that you did different? When it, because everyone thinks differently. We all think, we may think we agree with the thinking, but and as we're thinking, we're all thinking differently. And so this is, to me, the source of the intelligence of business leaders. And that's what makes them valuable. That's why some people make a lot of money, because of how they think. And today, the trend is to hire people as to how they think, not what they've done. We can't rest on past laurels. We have to be advancing. We have to be, seeing ahead, being that scout on the hill. And what I also learned is that the CFO role is close to a deputy CEO. What that means is that the CEO and the CFO are one. And the CFO has the responsibility of building the relationship with the CEO. And if that is not aligned, if those two positions aren't aligned, we've got some challenges. Because if the CEO is not listening to the CFO, and if the CFO doesn't agree with the vision and where the CEO is going, it's not going to work. And the ripple effect within the organization is going to be chaotic. So when hiring a CFO, the number one thing is to make sure there's alignment. And that's a relationship built over time, of course. But they both have to come in with the same intentions in mind. Also, in discovering the value of the finance end of things, is that the CFO is, the chief future officer, what that means is that they need to be paying attention to the culture. It's almost taking an audit of the company culture and saying, instead of being cheap and saying, no, we're not going to spend money on our people. We're going to cut back. We're not going to have, birthday cakes on, people's birthdays or whatever people do internally. They need to look at ways to validate people and have a budget that set aside to feed the culture. However that may be, it might be, continuous improvement. So there's a budget to send people to continually learn, to celebrations for achievements. But, when we think about culture, it's what attracts people to want to work in a company. They want to know that they're making a good decision. And we know when you're going in for an interview, everything is roses. Everyone says all the right things, but as soon as you get in, you might be facing a dog's breakfast. And then, of course, the steward of the money. Now, the steward of the money is, of course, obvious that the CFO would be the steward of the money. In this case, what I'm saying is the steward of the money is educating all of the decision makers on the importance of the money and why we have to be thinking strategically about how we're going to financially grow the company. What are the benefits of thinking this way? So that's where I see the remedy. So I'm going to go back to making decisions. It's all part of thinking differently. What I've observed with many people is when they make real important decisions, they make the decision only quarter of the way of a decision-making model. So everyone's high at the front end. Oh yeah, high-fiving, we made a decision. But have you really thought the decision through? And I'll give you an example. There's an insurance company that one of my clients was privy to that got a claim for $1 million in pesos. And it went through several decision makers and they approved and they kept the approval process going until it got to the CFO. And the CFO sent a check for $1 million Canadian. So yeah, we can say, well, that was extreme error, but it's just, we're not paying attention to paying attention when it comes to things that we just assume without seeing what we're really doing. So making decisions, as we all know, aren't as simple as just making a decision. We have to really take time, really be, cognizant, and I call it being the objective observer of the decision. Step away, and if you were educating someone on making the decision, you would guide them through it instead of just making it happen. So, how to remedy the demand? Well, I believe remedying the demand for the complexities, the risk management, all the things that are coming at us is to develop a 21st century CFO mindset. And how do we begin? Well, what I do with clients is I have them take CFO inventory. And when I look at their experience gained, I see, what they've done, what they're capable of. A lot of it sits in the finance section of their experience. And then I look over at the experience required and I see where the holes are, where are the gaps. And we can do this with anything. Whenever, you're hiring somebody, you're trying to give someone a review within the organization for raises, just have them go through, what have you gained since you've worked here, and what do you require? And we assume that everything is copacetic. And once you start to separate the two things, and not to make someone wrong, but you can see where you can actually be a leader and start to help them to develop the areas where there's weakness. Also, build a career advancement roadmap. Now, what that is that if somebody wants to advance in their career, whether you're a CFO or whether you're a controller, a finance specialist, anyone that wants to advance their career, they need to design a career advanced roadmap. What that means is, where do you want to go? Most people just, are in a job, they're not in a career. There's a big difference. So when you're looking ahead, you're saying, well, let me see, where do I fit? Where do I want to be? Where do they need my expertise? And where we're used to just getting job requisitions and then applying, and then 500 resumes are stuck in a funnel somewhere, hoping to be seen and never heard from again. It's really being strategic. This is where you can really design your strategic thinking for yourselves, whether it's a career advancement roadmap or another type of roadmap. When you look at where you're going and you work backwards to how you're going to get there, you actually design it. This is what we do together as clients. We design it. And what is interesting, the minute we start to get serious and we put our effort into it, we start meeting people within the companies that we are wanting to participate in. You can do this in sales, you can do this with jobs. It's just the minute you decide, because it all comes from within you, what you want to do, and have the confidence and the courage to say, yeah, I want to work there. And I've seen people do it, and it's fantastic. Now, whether they end, once they get in, they go, well, no, I want to change my mind. This isn't really where I want to be. We can always go back to square one and start over again. But this is a great tool for everyone that's listening. So then we create a portfolio versus a resume. Resumes are becoming obsolete. You're going to find this more and more because everyone has the same one. It all says the same thing. How does somebody mine, especially in an executive position? How do they mine for the talent and the intelligence of what you need in a job, in a career, and in a position? So what I've done, I'm going to show you. I don't know if I can show. Can you show this on the screen? No. Okay, I can't show you. Sorry, I have an example here. The front page, and I just want you to think about yourselves right now. I want you to think about not what you do, but who you are. So there's a switch, there's a difference. It isn't, we all know what you do. Your business card suggests it, or that's the first thing people ask you. But I want you to think about who you are. Who are you? And so what we do on the first page of this portfolio is we depict a picture of you. And whether it's someone, whether you climb mountains, whether you're a mountain climber, you're a tennis player, you're a good mother, a good dad, you love dogs. It's not so much what it is. It's really for people to connect with you immediately. They immediately know if they're aligned. They immediately know if they have anything in common with you. And then when you turn the page, you have the inside left-hand page, and visualize what you're looking for. What do you want to become? What is it that you're seeking? And that becomes the content on that page, where, if you want to become a 21st century CFO, what is that? You would describe it. And then underneath it, why is that needed? Why do people need a 21st century CFO? Then on the other page, on the inside right-hand page, visualize your intellectual property. What makes you different? And most people, when I ask them, what is their intellectual property? They stare into space. They can't fathom what I'm saying because they only see their job. They only see what they've been hired to do. And I'll give you an example of where I'm going with this. So when you're hired, you get a job requisition. And I know many people, especially you that are listening, you do your job, but you add so much more value. Well, you're not getting paid for that extra value. Nobody knows you're adding more value because you're conscientious, you're committed, you're a good employee, you've got good work ethic. So what we do is we separate your job from all the value you've added, and we make that your intellectual property. And that's a whole other revenue stream of possibility. And then the back page is, of course, your bio, a testimonial, and your contact info. So this way, you have yourself packaged so that whether you use it or not, what happens, it raises your level of confidence. It makes you see yourself from a different view, and it gives you pride in the fact that the company or whoever you're seeking needs you more than you need them. So you also incorporate the 5 CFO pillars. Now, these pillars can be used for CEOs, they can be used for COOs. So it's not just for CFOs. I created the pillars because I wanted structure in thinking. I wanted to have measurement. I wanted to see, how people are demonstrating their leadership by the areas that they are, are impacting. So that above, including everything I've said, the other thing we do once we have the portfolio is we go shopping. And what that means is traditionally you're looking for a job requisition, but what we do is we look for companies that we research that are, have a vacancy for the intelligence you carry. And once we see that there's an opportunity that we build, including in our career advancement plan, we create a way to make an introduction and build relationship with that company that person wants to work in. So it's a complete reversal of what we're used to. And how we do it is the minute we decide, we start attracting to us the companies and the industries we want to be part of. So the 5 pillars that I talked about earlier, these are the pillars. Leadership, of course, is the most important pillar of all. Leadership is, without leadership, a company is pretty doomed. And when you think of the trillions of dollars that have been spent on leadership training, development, courses all over the world, where are the leaders? How do you find them? How do you know you're a leader? How do others, find them? And I believe it's the followers that determine the leader. The leader doesn't determine their leader, the follower does. So the 5 pillars acts as a bridge, educating 20th century CFOs and emerging CFOs and becoming a 21st century CFO. It's an opportunity to grow, that you can measure, that you can see that you're crossing the bridge into this new way of thinking, of being accountable to the level that you've arrived, so that when others see that you're adding value in the areas, not only with leadership, but in all the other areas that the pillars represent. So the CFOs that are out there today, and I've seen the maze of CFOs. I've worked with everyone in every industry, not everyone, but in every industry, someone in that industry. And when we think of titles, I put this slide up because when we look at a title, we assume the person knows everything. And in the CFO world, that's not the case. They're all over the map. They're the foundation of accounting for sure. That's a given. But when you see them collectively and what their responsibility are in representing these different CEOs, there's an alignment that has to happen in understanding, what is a public company, what is a private company. They're 2 different CFOs, even though they have the title. So when you look at this collage of intelligence that you report to, just know you have to understand not only how they think, but what are they responsible for? How difficult is it for them to lead the company? So, for example, not-for-profits, are constantly, looking for donors or looking for funding where they don't have any, they don't really have an entrepreneurial model where they can find ways and means to, create revenue, like a private company can with a product or service. So managing that, because you can be blindsided really quickly if there's no funding. What do you do? Well, you're always reactive. You're always, trying to get in front of the challenges when it comes to money. So it's really, when I say getting in front of things, you've got to get ahead of it and not let it take over. And you've got to have a plan in order to stay alive. It's just important, especially the way things are today. So the CFO, with the other areas other than leadership, with sales, finance and technology and operations, they're all different areas of intelligence that the CFO needs to spend time and understanding how these individuals think. First of all, do they understand finance? Now, we assume people do if they have degrees or they have an MBA, that they understand finance. I've found that it isn't as simple as it sounds. Sales, for instance, doesn't know how they get paid. They know how they go out and they bring in money, but they don't understand discounting. They don't understand the impact of discounting and, on the overall picture of finance. And in my book, when I write about the responsibilities of the CFO and how do we educate all these decision makers on, first of all, building budgets. What does that mean? Understanding and respecting the money, not just always needing the money, but really getting a grasp on where is the money coming from. And of course, I have great reverence for sales, because without revenue in the private companies, it doesn't matter. So we have to give reverence to the people that go out and pound the pavement and make cold calls and boast about the company and get people to leave their competition and come over to the other side in order for the company to sustain financially. So it's bigger than just, numbers on a sheet. It's looking at a holistic view of all the areas that matter, that spend money, that respect the money and celebrate the wins that are happening along the way. So this is my book that I'm currently working on. It's not completed. It's going to delve into everything but numbers. It's going to talk about, how to hire well, and the recipe that I put in for hiring CFOs is going to go across the line for anyone. I've gone to great detail in both sides of what a CFO, the questions a CFO should ask, and what a CEO should ask, and in order to make a better decision at the end of the interview. That's just one aspect. I'm going to go deep into all of the pillars of all the different client experiences throughout the book, so that you have a real-time understanding of incidents and ways and means to think differently, to actually use a lot of the information to, make better whatever speaks to you and incorporate it into your companies. That should be coming out early in next year. I'm super excited about it. It's been quite a feat to communicate as an observer and not just not telling you about something, but to actually give you some, tangible things that you can use and bring forward within your organizations. So I thank you for listening. I'm, super happy, Jamie, that I had this opportunity. I, can't see anyone, so that's awkward for me because I love seeing everyone in the audience, but I'm going to turn it over to Jamie.
Awesome. So anybody that has any questions, be sure to share those with me and I'll make sure they all get addressed, and I'll start with the ones we have so far. So we'll leave up your slide for a couple seconds, Jan, in case anyone wants to take the info, but we'll share the slide deck after as well. So if you don't have your camera or notepad available to take this info down, you'll get it in an email shortly. So Jan, couple questions I wanted to bring up. So one of them was, you talked about the steward of the money and how important that is for the CFO's role. And I know that we've talked about this before as well. I think that financial literacy and that education piece of being the steward of the money is really important. And I think we should dive into that a bit deeper, because sometimes we forget as CFOs or as business leaders that not everybody's starting at the same place as us. And so we can be afraid of being condescending, and we don't want to, over educate or oversimplify because we don't want to insult someone or make them feel like less than, I guess. But in addition, we sometimes think that we overestimate people's financial literacy, and we assume they are on the same page as us, or that the years and years of education and experience we have, like, some things seem like common sense to us, but the reality is that we only know that, and it is common sense because of the experience and education we've had. So this is something that the CFOs and I talk about a lot, and a lot of it was actually came from some of the advice that you gave in another presentation. I think, first and foremost, you got to ask yourself, is this executive, like, let's rank the team, however you want to do it, 1 out of 5 or ABC, whatever, right? But like, actually step back and think, what is the financial literacy of this executive team that I'm working with every day? Because if you don't actually step back and ask yourself that, then you can be guaranteed that the messaging and the communication and the education's not aligned with the needs. Similarly, if you walk in and you're expecting something from the sales team and you're having a presentation with the sales team, you have to step back and ask yourself, like, what's the financial literacy of this team? And I would anticipate that for most companies, the financial literacy of, say, the sales team is going to be vastly different than the executive team. And how you communicate and educate has to align to where they're at. We have to meet them where they're at. And first you have to ask, where are they even at? So let's explore that for a couple seconds. Like, you've worked on both sides, coaching CFOs and coaching CEOs. How much misalignment do you see because people aren't educating at the right level or even recognizing that part of the job?
Well, I think that you're right. There's a lot of assumptions. I do find CEOs, unless, they have a financial background, they're not tuned in at the level that a CFO might think. They're cognizant, of course, but they give it to someone else. It's off the side of their desk. They want to be focused on growing the company, being visible, making things happen from that role. And so they put a lot of trust in that person. And from what I've experienced, because they can't get bogged down in the weeds. They just have to trust the person has the intelligence to bring them in. And when a decision is made from a financial level, that they have this confidence that the person is done their homework, has actually, stepped out of their vortex of just the accounting world and looked outside and said, I think we need to make a decision today because we're going to be impacted down the road. We're so, we're a reactive business culture. We're not a proactive business culture. So finance has to be proactive, and through financial literacy. So in the relationship with the CEO, if the CEO, which many are not financially as literate as they could be, they may ask the question, they may speak the speak, but underneath they're really not sure. They play a role. They almost pretend that they know. In some cases, is really dumbing things down. Like, give you an example. If you're going to do, M&A is a big thing. So mergers and acquisitions is all transactional. It's a transaction and it's all about money. So what the CFO can do is say, okay, well, we have to take into consideration once we make this merger or acquisition or takeover, we have to see the transition. What is it going to cost to do the transition? And then the transformation. I see M&A as, transaction, transition, transformation. And that's where the conversation changes from the actual transactional side, because all they see is the bottom line. They're only looking at what they're going to gain from this transaction. And there's way more involved than what's really there. If everyone's locked down in the transaction, they're not seeing the outcome. So the CFO needs to have the confidence to come in, speak up, and say, well, this is going to cost us way more. If and everyone knows there's redundancy and so on and so forth with those situations, but that's what people need to be prepared for, is what's the total outcome, and looking at things in a holistic way, that we're not just looking at the transaction. And the 99.9% of acquisitions are transactional. Like, no one thinks beyond that. They're only looking at the numbers. So it's taking it in baby steps. It's honoring what the CEO is doing and how they think, but it's adding those little nuggets of information, planting seeds, and not talking down. They can't talk down. They've got to talk with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's that balance, is that people are afraid of talking down. So then they'll start over assuming and overestimating the financial literacy, but it's finding that balance that's appropriate within the culture of that company and that CEO, where you can ask the questions and be collaborative without talking down, but also there's less risk of bringing something up that the CEO does know than not bringing it up because you assume they must know, right?
Yes,
And
right.
so, that education piece is so huge. And I think that, too often we assume that people, even like one of my favorite examples, and apologies for those that think I'm a broken record, but even the financial statements, right? We assume people know how to read financial statements, but surprisingly, there's a huge percentage of even CPAs that can't actually read a financial statement in any meaningful, forecasting, future-oriented way. And so, you should really start with the assumption that people don't know how to read those financial statements, and then ask yourself, how can they get the information from the financial statements? What's the objective of this month-end report? And start to think of it from that angle. And that could mean that you have to visually change the way it's presented. It could mean that the conversation or meeting or the medium that it gets delivered changes. It could mean a lot of things, but you're probably safer to assume that they don't understand what you're sending than that they do.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that, sometimes we think, oh, well, I'm in a public company, so they understand. No, they probably don't. And you'd be surprised at how many executives and senior leaders, for example, and this can be very offensive as someone who used to be part of the month end and year end and quarter crunch. You're spending your week, you spent Thanksgiving weekend on your quarter, and you'll be shocked to find out that half the senior leadership in your big public company isn't ever going to read that quarter. They'll never
Yeah,
read the
yeah.
books to the
No,
financials. They'll never read those statements. And so, remember, they're not reading it. Why? Why, right? Part of it is financial literacy, and that it's just not meaningful information. Part of it is by the time it is published and goes to the public, it's not very user friendly for operations, and it's kind of dated. There's many reasons why they don't read it, but the reality is, if they're not reading it, it's telling you something, and it's often about, it can often help you in terms of that steward and educator role. So I think it's really an interesting discussion, and one we forget, because we
yeah.
forget that we're part of that. Educating is so critical, and it really, really is. There's a question from one of the members about the most valuable CFO skills that are needed. So when you're talking to CEOs and boards, whether they're transitioning the CFO or trying to hire one, what are you hearing are the most valuable CFO skills?
So what I find is that people like CFOs, the mindset of CFO is always sort of been, off to the side, only called upon when they need the numbers. And so first of all, they have to learn how to, first of all, they have to grow their confidence to be able to speak up. And this is, I think, one of the weaknesses. So learning how to speak up, put up your hand, and be prepared before speaking. Like you just can't just throw something out there that has no relevance or doesn't make any sense. But I find that just the confidence, the layers of confidence. Everyone's confident, but there's different layers of confidence. So especially with boards, with small companies that are raising capital, the CFO has to stand up and tell it like it is. Like we got to get out of the wishing and hoping that we're going to make it, and we need to be very honest with the numbers, but not only scare people to death, but actually have a solution. Like with that strategic mindset, we need to come with a solution. And if you're not the person that can do it, you need to find somebody to help you, because it's one thing to make to bring the reporting, but if you don't have a solution with it, it's not going to help anything, because everybody's just stuck in the problem. So that's what I find is number one. The strategic thinking is, and it takes time, and that's why the good CFOs make space. They make space to think, to process, and not just, try to get things done. I see people rushing. They work 12 hours a day to get things done for reporting and stuff like that. No, you've got to have space to really, let it speak to you, I say. Let the numbers speak to you. Let what you're communicating speak to you so that you can be prepared to get the point across and let those listening know, what they're up against. Because we all dream about we're going to make money. And by the way, money's an outcome. People think once they make money, they've arrived. No, money is an outcome. They're supposed to make money. But it's not the end result. It's just part of what you're supposed to do. So when you think about being in a situation where, there's a challenge with the numbers, we don't have enough revenue coming in. Well, yeah, let's talk about the solution. And the CFO can lead that. And definitely, and one of the things I need to add to my slides is the educator hat. The CFO is the educator, the finance educator, as you said, Jamie. They need to be cognizant of that. If they're not good teachers, we got a problem. If they don't know how to teach and see the holes in the fabric in each of the areas of the company that are weak in the financial world, they're in trouble. The company's in trouble right away.
Yeah, I love that, Jan. A couple things to just touch on, like you talking about having the confidence to bring a solution. And I think, one of my favorite sayings is it's easier to criticize than create. And so I think sometimes what people have to realize is that when you come with a solution, people will often, they'll see the flaws in your solution and from that be motivated and have momentum to come to the right solution. And God knows any business who, takes the CFO solution and takes that as the Bible and runs with it,
Yeah.
is also not going to be a very successful business. The reality is that solution, whether it's brought by the CFO or the director of sales or the chief operating officer or even the CEO, shouldn't end up being the actual solution that gets done, right? Because the whole point of an executive is that, okay, now I've got an idea, I've got my solution as the CFO. Now we're going to get some input from the COO, input from sales, input from the CEO, et cetera. And then we together come up with a better solution, right? But it's a lot easier to start with something and then end with something greater than it is to start with nothing or just to start with a problem. So I think you're bringing a good point, Jan. And again, depending on the executive culture and the players in the room, whether that solution is like an idea that's raised as like a question, or whether it's like, hey, here's a possibility, or whatever it is, at the end of the day, be prepared for it to be criticized and to, not to be cheesy, but to amplify it. And then you'll have something better, but you got to start somewhere. And just bringing problems without solutions is not usually the best way to participate in an executive. There may be some executives that's culturally appropriate, but most not. And I mean, the other thing I would mention to that same idea is if you're a CFO that's only bringing problems to the table and not solutions, that is not the same as, say, the director of sales or the CEO who brings problems to the table. And the reason is that there's an unconscious bias against the CFO, that they are like the no man, the devil's advocate, the negative Nelly, all those stereotypes, right? So when you bring a problem without a solution as a CFO, you're fighting an unconscious bias that's all you are, is a problem raiser, and you're not capable of anything more. And so for the COOs and the directors of sales and the business owners and the CEOs listening, recognize that you guys are acting and responding to your CFO with an unconscious bias, because you are. And for the CFOs that are listening, don't fight it. Acknowledge, hey, people think I'm negative. People think I'm a devil's advocate. People think all I'm capable of is bringing problems. So how do I fight that? And so you got to work harder than all your peers in the room, in my opinion, because you do have that unconscious bias against you. So you better be bringing solutions, and the pressure on you to bring a solution is higher than the peers in the room because of that unconscious bias that you're often seen as the one that says no, the one that pokes holes, the one that challenges, the one that controls the purse strings, etc. So those are some of the things that I see in regards to what you said, Jan. I don't know if you disagree or see something different.
Yeah, no, 100%. The bias is there. The bias is there. So it starts with looking at the relationship with the CFO and CEO. That's number one. If you're in a company or wanting to do business with a company, check that out. Just check it out. Are they aligned? Are they talk to each other? Do they, are they, beating to the same drum? The other thing with the 5 pillars is sales has to be at the decision-making table. And if sales isn't at the decision-making table, and I also think they need to report to finance, because without the revenue and the numbers and the people talking the same language, that through osmosis, the sales lead will start to understand and lead their team better. Because they're kind of in their silos. Everyone's in a silo. Sales particularly, they're off running out there doing their job, thinking they're doing a good job, and they don't understand the impact of what they're bringing home. They don't understand profitability. They don't understand margins. They literally are at a deficit because they're going out into the workplace without all the information. They're only selling. They're just knocking people over and getting a sale. And I think that relationship with finance and sales is critical. And once that's aligned, there's a respect that's formed. And that respect carries into the marketplace because the salespeople are able to talk differently when they understand, and then they have to understand the other side, the customer. What's their financial situation? Can they afford the product? So there's a completing a cycle. So if you're in your side and you know what you have to do to understand, the company or the prospect is going through the same thing. So you have a different relationship of understanding the money.
Yeah, I think I don't know that I agree with you that sales should report to a CFO, but I definitely agree with you on that alignment. And I think that when we look at a classic executive team of like ops, CEO, finance, and sales, that the two that probably see themselves as most misaligned and not needing a close relationship is probably the CFO and sales, which is ridiculous, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately, where does the money come from? Well, it comes from the sales. And
Yeah.
what you do with it could be a different story, right? But where it comes from is from the sales. And funny enough, by the way, for the CFOs listening, a good percentage of the problems you have, the answer is sales. Like
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
sales, better quality sales. Like the reality is, if you're looking for a solution and you're like, oh, I don't know what I should offer as a solution, start with sales, because chances
Yeah.
are the solution is in the sales. Not always, obviously, but not a blanket statement. But the funny thing about CFOs and accountants is that that's often the last place we look, but yet it's the first answer that's going to make an
Yeah.
impact. So
Yeah.
I think that misalignment between sales and CFOs it's a fantastic opportunity. Those that actually address that and consider it key and make that a huge part of their job and their relationships are going to be far further ahead. So, oh, and a couple members mentioned the same thing. So I think that alignment's important and definitely worth going for wine and discussing whether sales should report to a CFO. I think we could have
I knew I'd get.
not a Tuesday after Thanksgiving lunchtime chat, but we could like hash that out in a happy hour, I think.
Yeah, we'll have to hash it out because when you think about who would they report to then, now that I've opened up that can of worms.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like if you think about a classic EOS org structure, it's like, you've got the visionary integrator and then the three executives, ops, finance, and ops, finance, and sales. And so they report to the integrator that reports to the visionary. But obviously, org structures should change based on all kinds of things, right? So I read recently this post that was from a fractional CFO educator actually in the US, and he was talking about how the CFO position is going to be as essential or ubiquitous as bookkeeping because we're doing such a better job of marketing what a CFO does and having conversations like this, Jan. There's more access to CFOs than there ever has been because of the intake of fractional and the acceptance of it. And then business owners are just becoming smarter. And so when they're smarter, they just need that much more advanced and sophisticated level of strategy and information. So wondering, when you're out there talking to your clients that are CEOs, business owners, all the other executive seats we just talked about, Are you seeing the same thing, that it's becoming a much more just, table stakes role within even small, medium business?
Yeah, I think, like with startups, like I always promote with startups, you need a lawyer and a CFO right at the beginning. Because you don't know the journey you're on, and you need that intelligence in your back pocket. Not so much to hire them right away, but having, as advisors for sure. Because you're kind of lost. We've romanticized on entrepreneurship, and we haven't told them what they're really in, what they're getting themselves into. And it's all about not having enough money. So money is the core thing, the core element in growing a company. And if you don't have intelligence to guide you, I've seen like, I think you brought this up, Jamie, that entrepreneurship has become a lifestyle where all the people are doing is raising capital, and there's no revenue. So the foundation has to be revenue based in order for the company to survive. It can't be just raising capital, and that's what everyone's running out the front door doing. And you're gonna have to pay it back. Like, and then people spend it like drunken sailors. And so, when you think about it, we need to tie down and bring that financial intelligence right at the beginning. Give a roadmap of what the journey is going to be, where they're going to hit the walls, what intelligence do they need in order to make better decisions, and have access to that intelligence. So yeah, I find companies, they find a bookkeeper to do everything. There's no relationship, there's no intelligence. It's just, oh, just do the books, send me the reporting. But they're not sitting down and seeing the journey that they need to be paying attention to, that they're going to embark on in the money world. So that's where I see the roles are, the need for that intelligence is, first of all, there's a hole in a startup if they don't have that resource, a big hole in startups. And it's almost like bringing them all together and having a panel of CFOs and saying, hey guys, this is where you're vulnerable. And you need that intelligence to help you break through these barriers that you're going to find, because everything collapses because of their ignorance.
Yeah, and I think, and it's interesting because when you talk about that whole, one thing that I've seen more than once is that it's a hole that they actually do think is filled by that bookkeeper or by their compliance or tax accountant, right? And
Yeah,
what people need to recognize is, first and foremost, whether your bookkeeper or your tax or compliance accountant can actually fill that hole is a separate question. Start with the fact that you're not paying them for that.
yeah,
So if they're capable of forecasting and strategic decision making and bringing that insights or those solutions or problems to the table, let's be clear, if you're paying a bookkeeper fee, you're not paying for that. If you're paying for your year-end tax and notice to reader, or whatever we call them nowadays, to be done, compliance, you're not paying for that. So to expect those people to do those things when you're in no way paying for it, that's not in the scope of the contract, it's not part of the engagement, that's a bit
yeah,
silly and crazy. So right there you have a hole. And then second, asking whether or not that person is the right person. And by and large, they're not, right? Because an
yeah,
expert bookkeeper usually does not have CFO skills. An expert in tax, God knows a lot of intelligent things, probably more intelligent things than your average CFO, but they don't have expertise as a CFO. They probably have never worked in business outside of professional services, which is not the same
yeah,
thing. And similar for your compliance and your assurance provider, right? And
right.
so two questions. First, are you even paying for it? And then second, do they have the capability of providing it?
Yeah,
And I think a lot of people don't even recognize they have a hole, Jan, because they just assume that it is within the scope and capacity and capabilities of the bookkeeper that they almost always have, or the tax and compliance accountant, which they almost always have.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. It's really, when you think of all the education that's out there in universities and everywhere else, and you look at a business and you can immediately spot it, like I learned to read financial statements a long time ago. And as soon as I get in, I can see where the weakness is. It's so obvious to me where they're overspending, where things don't make sense, where the questions come up, and I think that's what is needed for companies is, once you read it, it's not just the numbers and it's the outcome of the numbers. It's like, what are your habits? What are you doing that's causing this? And the one thing that is really crazy that I've encountered where the owner or the founder, because they're the owner and founder, they think they can dip into the money whenever they feel like it and take the money out. And that, that they can't do that. So then there's a discipline. There's a discipline too, if understanding how to respect the money. And then they're penalized because they have to pay tax on that money eventually and report it to CRA. But in the meantime, they're just living the life, renovating their houses and, and they're dipping in because of that arrogance of being the founder or the owner of the business. And I don't want to make anyone wrong, but eventually you have to be accountable to it, to the habits of,
Right.
of, of what's happening with the money.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because like how do you get that across to a founder, and what's the best way to approach that conversation? And so, I think first and foremost, I just want to say that I'm 100% against the political idea that most business owners or founders are living on the high end or rich or whatever. That's not true. They're still, even with that gray zone, that absolutely is true, Jan, which goes back to our original part of our question and answer, education. Even within that gray zone, the vast majority of founders and business owners are earning less than their skill sets would
Yes.
give them if they got a corporate job. And by and large, they're taking huge risk and contributing to our economy by being employers and by having people that have healthy work life, and they're giving to the community. So I don't want anyone to leave this thinking we think otherwise. But Jan and I agree that the problem is education and whether they understand the consequences of their actions to the business, to those employees that they love, ultimately to their customers and clients and community that they love. That's a very big gap at times, right? And for them to understand that the consequences of them taking money or bleeding the company's cash flow can be a challenge. And we were talking about this at lunch the other day, actually, where, it's so funny. One of the CFOs brought up that it's not uncommon for a business owner, a founder, to look at a bank account and say, for simplicity, they see $1 million. And then they're like, oh, I have $1 million. So therefore, do quick math, I could easily take out a $50,000 dividend. But this is obviously oversimplifying, but it's makes the
Yeah.
point. That $1 million could have came from like a shareholder that they just raised money from, or it could have come from the bank credit line and the money got moved to the account. Like they forget where the money came from. And so it's like, obviously taking a $50,000 dividend, if the money came from an investor or came from the bank, is a bit illogical, right? But there's an education piece to that. Making sure that the founder and business owners recognize that taking the money out just because it's available doesn't actually make sense if it wasn't, if it wasn't grassroots earned from revenue, right? Because
Yeah.
ultimately it has to be paid back.
Yeah.
And ultimately use of proceeds was probably not to pay you a dividend.
Right.
Similar, and all that cash flow management of like, yeah, you have $1 million in the bank account, but once we look at your working capital, you're actually in the hole by 300,000. So no, there's not 50,000 to give as a dividend. And a lot of CFOs would be like, well, Jamie, don't be stupid. Of course, everyone knows that. No, a
No.
lot of business owners and founders we're talking mid-sized businesses, substantial businesses, do
Yeah.
think that the money in the bank account, that the bank balance is a meaningful number. And so going back to that education and to the members' question about like, how do you have that conversation with a founder? Oftentimes it is as simple as education. You're assuming that your version of common sense is a shared thing.
Yeah.
It's not. And so if you start with education, they'll come to the conclusions themselves without you having to have that awkward, horrible, ugly conversation of like your lifestyle's too expensive. Not always, don't get me wrong. We've definitely had to have CFOs have hard conversations about lifestyle. But if you start with education, a lot of times they end up coming to the conclusion themselves very quickly. And that education is what's often missing because they don't connect the dots the way that you are, or the way that you think is common sense. So it's often about that. And I think the other thing is like, what is their personal viewpoint or the business's methodology on some of these deeper questions like debt, like equity,
Yeah.
like use of funds,
Yeah.
and making sure everyone kind of understands what's acceptable, what's normal, because, you know, even if you oversimplify this and think about a marriage, I was walking with a girl the other day who said, you know, when I first met my husband, he had $30,000 in personal debt with no assets tied to that. And my response was like, that's not that bad. What's the big deal? And she was like, oh my God, I can't marry this irresponsible man. And meanwhile, I was like, oh, like, I don't think 30,000 is that bad. Like networking, education, who knows what it was spent on? Like, I don't think that's a big deal. But, you know, everybody's got different perspectives,
Yeah.
but we often assume that our perspective is the right perspective and the only one, or that it's common sense. And that's not necessarily true. So I think
Yeah.
it's not easy, that's for sure.
No, no, it's not easy. And I do think money does things to people. Um, and I've seen it where, you know, they maybe have never had a lot of money and now they have a lot of money in that bank account and they already think they've arrived and they haven't put anything into context. And I've seen that very, you know, many times where the peril of the company is because of it separating the two, like money is a tool, you know, to build the business. It's not there, it's not accessible for whatever people think. And I think that the steward of the money, the CFO, is, you know, where what I was getting at with that earlier is, you know, yeah, they have been, you know, number crunchers and, you know, you can't spend any money, and that has to change because the culture is affected. We have to build a culture into that because we have to spend money on culture, basically, is the bottom line. If in order to create a healthy culture, we have to be cognizant of it instead of, you know, making things cheaper, like sound like a cheapskate. We need to really, you know, and all the money that we earn, we have to carve out that piece in order to have a healthy culture because people have expectations. They're working hard, they're adding more value, they want to work for a good company, they want, you know, they want to know the company's looking out for them. They don't understand it themselves how the company makes money. They just see the boss coming to work in a, you know, in an expensive car, you know, lives in a big house, so he must be rich. So, you know, their mindset about money is we got a long way to go with financial literacy, with just the way people see money, starting with the CEO and CFO.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating discussion, right? Because, you know, when you speak about culture, you know, there's nothing impacts culture more in many ways than cash flow, right? How you use cash flow,
Yeah.
whether it's managed and in a healthy position, and people will recognize that what they're experiencing and feeling and seeing every day in a job ties to cash flow, but oftentimes it does. And you know, so it's all interrelated for sure, and it's really interesting how big of an impact these things can make. And to your point, you can avoid a cash flow
Yeah.
management issue by being proactive in the education
Yeah.
and the conversations,
Yeah.
right? And then that'll have in turn result in better
Yeah.
outcomes from a culture perspective, for sure.
Well, I had one client, and this is what he did every year. This is a small business, and he, you know, every January, with the goals came out, he would show them the financials, and he would show them why we needed 10% more sales. And he educated them, this was the CEO, educated them on what they needed to contribute as a whole and individually in order to make those goals work. And it was ingenious. And he was in business for 15 years, and the employees never left the company. They were so loyal to him because they understood what their role was, what their contribution was. And so he, you know, they knew that if they had money for a party, where it came from. it came from their hard work, came from sales, but they supported sales to make sure that happened. And when, that always stuck in my mind, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we being transparent and educating people through understanding, first of all, what are the numbers currently? Where do we need to go? How are we going to get there? And what is your contribution to get us there?
Yeah. And I love that story because it's like you give the data and the details, but then you talk about the impact on the business, but then you bring it all the way down to the impact on the individuals, right?
Yeah,
And helping people just make that alignment is so critical and a great example of financial literacy and that education versus like the other. I heard about this just last week, I think. So a company was doing profit sharing and they were transparent about their numbers, and they all year they were showing their numbers, and it wasn't a great year. It was a rebuild year, so there was no profit. So all year data was going out, no profit, no profit, no profit. And then, come Christmas, it's like National Lapoon's Christmas vacation or whatever. People are shocked and upset because they didn't get their profit sharing bonus and they had already pre-spent it, just like the
yeah,
movie.
yeah,
But meanwhile, it's like, and then the leader's like, what the hell? Like, I showed you all year that there was no profit. Why in the world would you have spent a bonus? Well, I spent the bonus because every year I get the bonus. So
yeah,
therefore I spent it. And then the leader's like, but I showed you all year that there was no profit. And that's a great example of like, there's education and actually being heard and understood, like the example you gave. But then there's what sometimes leaders and CFOs are probably in some ways the worst, where you just throw information and assume that people understand it and that they are making the alignments and that they get that no profit means no profit to share, which means no bonus. But
yeah,
that's a lot of assumptions. And some of you are thinking, well, Jamie, it's common sense, but it's not actually. It's not.
yeah.
Because you do need to sometimes spell it out and bring them along for the journey. So I think that it's really interesting the way that we get ourselves tied up into these things because we're all coming from a different spot. We have a couple more minutes for any last questions, and if anyone has any, please share them and we'll address them. Otherwise, we'll wrap up shortly here. Before we wrap up, Jan, I'm very grateful to have you, and
Thank you.
obviously, the way you approach the CFO mindset has more in common than not with Amplify. And Amplify, how with Amplify is all about sharing different perspectives and point of view, because nobody would attend if all they heard was my point of view and Amplify's point of view. They need a bit more diversity of thought. So this is really great. Just to touch on those admin items one last time. If you don't enjoy multitasking and therefore did not sign up for the live AHA with Amplify, do so as soon as you hang up with us, because we are very close to sold out and we do want our AHA members to get first dibs on that. It is going to be a roundtable learning on transactions, valuations, and financing. So hot topic, applicable to any one of you that's here with us today. And it's not a spoon-fed opportunity though, so you'll have to participate. And if not, it's not the event for you. So it's like speed dating with 6 experts and some of our Amplify CFOs. So lots of stories, lots of expertise, and it'll be really fun. Plus there's the food, the drink, and the in-person part too. Okay, in November, we're doing marketing with Michael, and we're going to talk about revenue forecasting. And I'm sure we're going to bring up some of the topics that me and Jan talked about with sales alignment and marketing alignment and the CFO. So really excited to talk about that topic in November. We're off in December, and then we're back for the new year again. We really appreciate everyone's participation and, of course, our experts that share the information with us. Thank you, Jan. Any last things you want to let people know before we wrap?
I think it's just being aware, more aware in your businesses of, what are you actually doing, where are you going, and not get caught in a web of just the doing. I think making space to really process and observe what is really happening, because we get so busy and time disappears, and we need to make space to just kind of oversee, is this working? Like, not wait till it doesn't work, but is it working? What are the milestones? What are the checkpoints that I'm on the right track?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Take
Bye.
care.